Okay, now I have a really big battery pack and it's been working great. I ran the microwave for 2 minutes and only used 1.4% of the battery. But now that I got it, how am I going to recharge it? As you all know, most electrical products have a max spec rating, but in real use, you hardly ever get all that. Today I decided to try out the 3 most popular ways to recharge your RV batteries and see how they actually perform. But first, let me show you the schematic of the setup I made here. This is the schematic for my lithium batteries. I have lithium batteries in the compartment. 6-volt lead acid batteries are in the stepwell. Now lithium batteries, they're grounded through the Victron shunt, so I'm measuring the current through the lithium batteries. This goes up into my 2000 watt inverter and also to ground. As far as the positive leads, the output from the lithium batteries goes into this bus bar. And from here I connect in circuit breaker for the converter and also the solar charge controller. Now the AB switch, you can connect either side 1, which connects into the lithium battery, or side 2, which goes to the lead acid batteries, or I can combine both together or just have none of them combined. And the output from this switch goes into my inverter. By the way, I don't expect most people to get a server rack system, but this system could also work if you have a couple of battle-borns in the stepwell and you want to add 2 more in here. Yes, with the AB switch, you can either connect them both together, use one bank or the other, or none at all. First method of charging your batteries, and one of the better ones, is of course solar. So I have a ZAMP ZS30A 30 amp solar controller with 275 watts of solar on the roof. We're located here in Southern California, so in the middle of March we're getting about 13 amps at noon. I don't know if that's enough or not, but we're going on a 5,000 mile trip, so we'll find out, and if I need more, I'll add more. The second method is with your converter or battery charger. The original one that came with it was not good for lithium, so I had to swap it out for a new progressive 60 amp model. That's a 2-stage, so it charges at 14.4 volts, and then when the batteries get charged up, it drops down to, I think it's 13.6. So I did test out the converter when the battery was about 80% state of charge, or 80% full, and it charged at 53 amps, so not quite to 60 amps, but maybe if the battery was lower, we would get to 60 amps. But anyway, that's a big improvement over the other one, which was a 45 amp, and when I measured that charging the lead acid batteries, it was only putting out 35 amps. Mercedes-Benz is a very conservative company, and they rate their alternator at 220 amps. It's a very good alternator, but they only allow you to use 40 amps for charging your batteries. I'm sure most people would just put in a 40 amp DC-DC charger. That rating seems a little conservative to me. Like for the Ford Transit chassis, they have a 230 amp alternator, and they let you use a lot more current. So that got me thinking, yeah, how much output is the alternator actually capable of? And can I use it a little bit more? Will it overheat? Will it burn up? Yeah, I decided to do some testing. I also know that a few people actually charge their lithium batteries directly from the alternator. And one guy who's a full-timer, he actually drew as much as 133 amps out of his alternator. Yeah, he was living there, he was running space heaters, all kinds of stuff with the engine idling. First thing I wanted to check is to see how many amps are actually going into lead acid batteries when you start up the engine. And surprise, surprise, what did I find? Okay, I started up the RV. Lead acid batteries are at 12.2 volts. And you see we're pulling, well, 40 some odd amps at idle just to charge the wet 6-volt batteries. What's up with that? So I disconnected the 6-volt batteries, hooked up the lithium, and turned those on. Now the lithium battery was pretty much full, but the charge going into them was started out at 55 amps, and within a few minutes it dropped down to 45 amps. So that seemed pretty reasonable. Of course, if the battery is at a low state of charge, it could draw more current and potentially damage the alternator. So let's make a test. So I ran a 1500 watt heater for probably like an hour and a half. So I consumed 106 amp hours out of the battery, which is way more than I would use in a day. But anyway, so I started up the engine and see what kind of current draw. So I used about 25% of the battery capacity. Let's turn on the engine. I'll let the alternator charge it and see how much current it pulls. Funny thing is, as soon as the engine started, the lithium battery was actually supplying energy to the starter and to the Mercedes battery. But in a few seconds, the alternator kicked in, then it slowly dropped down to 65 amps after probably about 8 or 9 minutes. Reconnected the 6-volt batteries, so all the batteries are connected. Yeah, in this case, the alternator was charging the lead acid batteries at 40 amps and the lithium batteries at 47.5. So total was about 87.5 amps. Yeah, so was the alternator getting warm? Well, I decided to crawl under and take a look. Yeah, mine is getting a little warmer, it's putting out a little more power. And I measured the temperatures. The case was cool enough to touch. The windings were about 160 degrees, which is really not that much, so it was actually doing pretty well. And yes, I've seen that YouTube video with the alternator smoking, but yeah, that was done by a company who sells DC-DC chargers, and who knows what the heck that alternator was. It looked like the windings were already burnt anyway, and could have been a cheap one. Also tried revving up the engine to see if the higher RPMs would make any difference. Maybe the output would go up, but yeah, didn't actually see any difference. So apparently this alternator is very well regulated. So does this mean you can get away without a DC-DC charger? No, it's really best to have that charger, so over all the operating conditions, you know exactly what your alternator is putting out. If my battery was fully depleted, it would pull a lot more current, and that could overtax the alternator and shorten its life. But I do believe the Mercedes-Benz alternator is a good one, and it has more capacity than you might think. In my case, I will not be leaving the alternator connected directly to lithium batteries. Yeah, my charging is going to be from the solar panels. And if they get really depleted by some cloudy days or something, I'll just fire up the generator and that'll recharge the batteries. So that covers what I've discovered and the 3 main charging methods for charging your lithium batteries. After this trip, most likely I'll remove the lead acid batteries, install a DC-DC charger, and then try to figure out how am I going to run the air conditioning from those batteries. My options are getting a soft start for the air conditioning, or a larger inverter, or maybe even a mini split. That'd be really cool. Well, that's it for now. Gotta get packing, so I'll see you later.